Hi there, everybody. I'm Jeff Maris from WisPolitics.com. Welcome to another one of our virtual events, and it's a pleasure to kick off the first day of our second annual Midwest Polling Summit. Last year we did a day-long thing at the Madison Club, but well, this year is different, obviously, right? So thank you to our generous event sponsors, AARP Wisconsin and the Outrider Foundation. Before we get started with our two guests today, and I introduced the details of the program, I want to talk about what day two offers tomorrow. You can still sign up for day two. We're going to have a panel looking at the landscape of the race, and we have Charles Franklin, who's director of the Marquette University Law School poll, and we will also have Ray Block. He's an associate professor in the Department of Political Science and Department of African American Studies at Penn State. We have Emily Swanson, who's the Director of Public Opinion Research for the Associated Press. Sarah Simmons of Purple Strategies. She's a polling expert who has helped various Republican campaigns, and she's got a lot of Wisconsin fans. And Barry Burden, he's the Director of UW-Madison's Elections Research Center. Also, upcoming programs, October 15th, we'll be having a virtual program on the top state Senate races with the Senate leaders. And on October 22nd, a new program, we're going to preview the presidential election in Wisconsin and the Midwest with 4 DC experts with the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee. And so you'll be able to find out about that later on this week, but you'll also be able to see any other details about the programming at WisPolitics.com. Now, today, we have two polling experts who will be talking about the national landscape and Wisconsin's, the picture in Wisconsin. So first up today to give us a keynote to kick off this second annual Midwest Polling Summit is Carroll Doherty. He's Pew Research Center's Director of Political Research. Welcome, Carroll. How are you today? And thanks for participating.
It's really an honor to be here, Jeff, and it sounds like a wonderful program, and just glad to be here. And I'll go ahead and get started if that's okay.
Yeah, give us what's the national political landscape looking like?
Well, I mean, as you can tell, I mean, one of the interesting facets of the general election campaign is in this extraordinary year when we're bombarded by event after event. We all know about those events: the pandemic, the deep economic recession, the demonstrations and protests over race and policing, and most recently, of course, President Trump's own COVID-19 infection. Is that the national picture has been pretty stable in terms of preferences between Biden and Trump. Biden has held a pretty steady lead of somewhere between 7 and 9 points, depending on which aggregator you look at, and in our polling as well at the Pew Research Center. I do think there's a question about whether, for all of this stability, we might be entering a period of some kind of change. Certainly the events of the last week have even kind of upped the ante a little bit, you might say, in terms of just extraordinary developments. And it's possible, at least, and I wouldn't go so far as to predict this, it's possible that we could see an even wider lead for Biden following Trump's hospitalization and his coming to the White House so quickly and statements since then. It's possible. In that regard, it does remind me of possibly a little bit of 2008, where you had a steady lead for Obama going into September. And then, of course, Senator John McCain, made this kind of pivot, suspended his campaign because of the financial crisis, went back to Washington and intervened in the financial bailout bill. It wasn't deemed very successful. Obama expanded his lead after that and went on to election. It's hard to know whether we're at that kind of pivot point right now, but it's worth considering. I mean, I think when we look back at 2016 and all the things that happened there are a lot of similarities in the current polling and a lot of differences. The similarities are that the overall demographic patterns are similar. big urban-rural divide in voting, the so-called the education divide, especially among white voters, the gender gap, all of those things very familiar from 2016, yet some significant differences as well. First of all, Donald Trump is an incumbent president now. He's not an insurgent candidate. He is the president, and as an incumbent, his record is the primary thing that people will be voting on, and in some ways, he's an outsized personality. So, you know, when we look at our data, you see that certainly incumbent presidents always on the ballot when they're up for re-election, but Trump in a special way, given the extraordinary developments of this year. I think one of the most interesting data points we had from August was we really enjoyed using open-ended questions to get at voters' real feelings on our online panel. And we asked Biden supporters, well, what's the main reason why you're voting for Joe Biden? And 56% in an online volunteered response, which is an extraordinarily high percentage, said that the main reason was because of Donald Trump. I mean, far surpassed anything else, that this is the motivating factor for Biden supporters. And I think that's a major difference. And when you see, you know, as the coronavirus, certainly Trump, understandably, given the death toll and the economic havoc caused by the pandemic, has tried to change the subject, to minimize the importance of the issue. It just keeps coming back. His own approval ratings on the coronavirus began in March at about 48%. Not bad. They've gone down 11, 15 points since then, and that's even before these last couple of weeks. And I think that's been the real challenge for him, is to deal with that. I mean, I would say there's another difference between now and 2016, a couple of others. Certainly, in many respects, while Joe Biden is not an extraordinarily popular figure among Democrats. I mean, he doesn't draw, you know, Obama-like favorable ratings or anything like that among the Democratic base. His reputation, his personal reputation, his personal favorability, much higher than Hillary Clinton. Famously, in 2016, both candidates were widely disliked. Both candidates were widely viewed as not credible. In this case, Biden, I think one of the consistent and perhaps consistently overlooked things is that Biden's seen as much more honest than Donald Trump, and that's been consistent in the polling throughout the year. And I would say that the other factor that's different from 2016, it's a little harder to get a handle on this, but the third-party presence isn't as prominent. I mean, the overall vote in 2016 for both Johnson and Stein, or for someone other than Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, was about 5%. In pre-election polling, it was much higher than that, above 10%. In the polls currently, you're only seeing about 5% going for Joe Jorgensen or Howie Hawkins. These are the main third or fourth party candidates who are on the ballot. A lot lower shares are saying they're voting third, fourth party this time. And I think, you know, what we're finding in some of our preliminary data, and we're releasing a new report later tonight, is some of these third party supporters from 2016 actually are voting for Joe Biden in a pretty large sense too. Some of them are sticking with third and fourth parties, but many of them now are kind of migrating to the Biden camp. And so I think for all of those reasons, Trump faces enormous challenges ahead. Now, what can we expect the last month of the election? I think the big, you know, kind of unanswered question, the big looming question, is whether people will be able to get to vote, whether the ballots will be able to be counted effectively, whether there'll be challenges around fraud, mail voting. Trump has already signaled this. You know, one of the things we found in one of our summer surveys is that Democrats far more likely than Republicans to say that they expect it to be difficult to vote. They're worried about the pandemic and going to vote in person. So Democrats are, by and large, more likely to vote by mail than Republicans. And of course, Trump is casting doubt on the fairness and accuracy of those ballots. So more to come on that. I think that's the big unanswered question. You know, we have high engagement in this election. voters are really interested. The share who say it really matters who wins is the highest in the 20 years we've been polling on that topic. 83% say it really matters who wins the election. Back in 2000, when George Bush was running against Al Gore, it was only 50% who said that. I mean, the stakes are really high. So that's going to lead to high turnout if people are able to cast ballots, if they're not discouraged from casting ballots in some way by either the fact of not knowing how to vote by mail, the procedures themselves, or if there's some kind of issues with polling places if they so choose to vote in person. So more to come on that, obviously, and then that could lead, the dire predictions that some people are making about the post-election period, challenges, lawsuits, things like that. That's a long way off. First, we've got to get through the election, and I think at this point, those are the major issues we see on a national perspective.
Okay, before I get into the questions from me and then the audience, and before Amy Levin comes on with AARP Wisconsin polling, I wanted to ask you about what is coming out tonight. Can you tease that a little bit?
Sure.
And we will tell everybody about it tomorrow, but maybe you can tease that a little bit.
No, terrific. Yeah, we have a major report. It's one of our major, we have an online panel survey that we think is a really good source of data. And it's a probability-based sample. It's not an opt-in poll. And I think the pollsters, the polling experts like Charles Franklin can describe that a little bit, but it's a very rigorous, robust panel. And yet we can produce a large sample size. So we'll be able to look at a lot of different subgroups in the population. Also, what we're looking for is confidence on issues, so certainly personal traits, and issues. And I mean, the basic story is the trajectory of the race. And we came out of the field, I think it was on the 5th or the 6th. The trajectory of the race really hasn't changed, in the sense that Biden holds a significant advantage nationally. Again, what's happening in the states, as we learned in 2016, is somewhat of a different picture. But a significant national edge for Biden, be it 7, 8, 9, 10 points, certainly gives him some reassurance that the states, the swing states will follow suit. And so, I think this will be an interesting survey simply because of its timing and because of the depth we go in on this. Again, we're seeing some issues around mail and in-person voting. Republicans telling us once again more likely to vote in person on election day. Democrats saying that they're more likely to vote by mail. We're going to put out a second report on this, simply homing in on those voting issues and the potential ramifications for allegations of fraud and things like that next week. But the report tonight will deal mostly with preferences and why people are voting as they are.
Okay, audience, will relay that all to you. I was going to ask on my list of questions for you, Carroll, was what's the top issue? And you kind of said the top issue is Donald Trump, at least with Biden voters. But at any rate, what is in the traditional sense, what's the big issue? Is it healthcare, the economy? You tell me.
Well, voters tell us the economy, and I think that wraps into the coronavirus. I think people are a little surprised when they hear that. That's a very traditional response. I mean, most elections, the economy is the top issue. You would think in this year that it might be supplanted by the coronavirus. I think the economy, to a certain extent, wraps in the concerns over the economic impacts of the coronavirus. And the other thing you see in the data is that Democrats, far more Democrats than Republicans, name the coronavirus as the top issue. Republicans don't, because they don't think of it as a very serious threat or a less serious threat than Democrats do. So you see this imbalance there. Both sides see the economy as a top issue. Healthcare, and I think now Supreme Court appointments are also relatively high on the list, and you'll see that coming into focus next week with the Amy Coney Barrett hearings. So I think all of those are the top issues, as well as the coronavirus. But you see, I mean, as you know, the polarization here, even around what's important, even around national problems and the seriousness of national problems, deep polarization on all of those topics. The problems that Democrats see, Republicans don't by and large agree with, climate change, things like that. and vice versa. The Republicans are more likely to see something like illegal immigration as a key problem. So the parties themselves disagree even about the nature of the problems facing the country.
What about self-identified independents or people who?
Yeah, they typically look like the public overall, or all voters if they're voters, and you see similar pattern with the economy being at the top of the list. But what we're seeing with this rise of polarization is that a lot of these independents, if they lean towards one party or another, they tend to adopt the positions of that party. And so Republican-leaning independents tend to vote in big numbers for Donald Trump, and no doubt Democratic-leaning independents will vote in big numbers for Joe Biden. Not as big as actual partisans, but certainly large majorities.
Yeah, you talked about also the differences between 2016 and this year. I'm going to run something past you. In my view, Hillary Clinton was the virtual incumbent. And so those who were, quote, undecided, well, they weren't going with the virtual incumbent. They were going to either go with Trump or not vote, or go to the third parties or not vote. This year, I think you're suggesting that, well, Trump is the actual incumbent, and that these few undecideds would probably not be going his way if they aren't already there. Did I read that right?
That's fair enough. I mean, I think the challenge for any political party, and I think George H.W. Bush discovered this in a way in the 1988 election, to win 3 elections in a row as a party, as you say, is extraordinarily difficult and challenging. And it proved that way for Hillary Clinton. And now Trump is the incumbent. He still runs and acts as if in some ways like he's an insurgent, but the fact is that this is his record now for the economy and the coronavirus and other issues, and it's one that voters by and large are taking a negative view to. I think the 2016 parallels are interesting too. I think one of the things to watch out for, and I know this was true in Wisconsin, is the October surprise, the unexpected development. We are where we are right now, but we still have several weeks to go. As we all know, in 2016, we did have that late development, the revival of the emails for Hillary Clinton, the FBI investigation. In particular, in Wisconsin, those late deciding voters went for Donald Trump very strongly. It seems as if this is a different kind of election. A lot of voters locked in a lot earlier. They're voting a lot earlier. And so hard to know. And given the pace of developments, it's almost as if voters have come to take it in stride now. We've seen the President of the United States contracted a deadly disease. We've seen 200,000 dead. We've seen a wrecked economy. I mean, it's going to be hard to find an October surprise that will actually move people, I think, unlike 2016. Yeah,
I guess we're going to find out tonight whether the first presidential debate had any effect. Is that right? Will you have?
Well, yeah. I mean, we were in the field after the presidential debate, and it did not have an effect on our data. The Biden lead would stay pretty much intact. I think that's true of most surveys. I mean, the vice presidential debate, hard to know. Usually not a major factor. I thought it was a very interesting debate. They certainly got their points out, both Mike Pence and Kamala Harris. Probably not a deciding factor. And then, the open question now that's been raised today about whether we have any more presidential debates. As you know, the news of the day is, the commission wanted to do something on a virtual basis. Trump seems to not like that. It's hard to imagine a situation where a candidate trailing in the polls would not want to debate, but we'll see what happens with Trump's decision on that.
Yeah. Pew has polled extensively on religion over the years. Mm-hmm. I mean, not just about political stuff, just about church going and whatnot. And I'm wondering whether, with the Amy Coney Barrett nomination, and there's a lot of this in the popular press about Catholics being the swing vote this year. Do you have any inkling about that?
Well, we've looked at long-term trends in party identification and voting. Catholics, a classic swing group in the public. You see a bigger difference now between, Hispanic Catholics make up a greater share of Catholics, all Catholics in the United States than ever before. Big differences in the voting patterns and party identification between white Catholics. White Catholics themselves are trending more Republican. And those high attending white Catholics, those that go to services frequently, they are becoming much more Republican. Latino Catholics, not so much. They retain sort of a Democratic imprint. They're more likely to be Democrats. But I think at this point you can almost declare white Catholics less of a swing group in the sense they move pretty Republican. But they're also a smaller group. Share of Catholics overall in the population has declined over the last 20 years.
Do you think it matters that Biden is a Catholic? He doesn't exactly. He's not. It's not like John F. Kennedy running as first. Right. But
although Kamala Harris did note, I thought one of the shout outs of last night's vice presidential debate was that he would be the second practicing Catholic as president if he was elected. So I think she made sure to make that point in the sense of trying to woo those undecided Catholics. And so, I think it matters in the sense that there is a sense that Republicans are using some of the criticisms of the nominee Barrett, Amy Coney Barrett, as sort of an anti-Catholic theme. They're saying that Democrats, and it even came up in last night's debate, that the Democrats are anti-Catholic. I think the presence of Biden as a practicing Catholic, it tends to inoculate themselves a bit from those charges, and I think certainly Harris last night was using that as kind of a shield.
Yeah, this goes. I want to come back to that Supreme Court thing. Hearings are going to start virtually, and it looks like the Republicans in the Senate are going to press that vote, and it's that issue again. I think. There's some religious aspects to it. There's certainly the abortion question is part of it. There's health care because the Supreme Court's going to have a health care hearing just after the election. I'm wondering, how do you think the people who are really centered on voting because of the Supreme Court, I mean, is it changing it up or is it just making them more hyped up?
That's the really good question, I think. What will be the impact of, I think there are a lot of threads about all of this. The polling on abortion is very interesting. 70% of the public does not want to see Roe versus Wade overturned. You do see more intensity of sentiment in the anti-abortion side than the pro-abortion side, pro-legal abortion side. So it's a little complicated there. Overall, the public, though, by a wide margin, does not want to see Roe versus Wade overturned. I think Barrett herself is kind of a wild card. People know who she is. She'll be on a national stage for the first time, and it's hard to know how people will feel about her. I think Democrats are looking at the polling about the process itself, which is, of course, should the next president, the next elected president, choose the next nominee or not. And I think that has been polled, shown that most Americans believe the next president should choose the next Supreme Court justice. So there are a lot of issues at play. It'll be interesting to see how it turns out. I think it seems as if just because of the personal side of this will have a somewhat lower temperature with everything else going on than the Brett Kavanaugh hearings in 2018, but who knows?
Yeah, before we bring on Amy Levin, who's going to talk about AARP polling, squeeze in a couple more questions here, Carroll, if you could. One question from the audience is this: you mentioned October surprise, but have we become immune to an October surprise? It's October 8th. We've had about 5 October surprises already. I mean,
it's a surprising year. Just since March, it's been one surprise after another. Not all of them good. In fact, many of them not so good. It is hard to know, especially with this president whose own presidency has been such a roller coaster. And you know, it wasn't so long ago that this president was impeached. Actually, people forget that. You know,
that seemed like ages ago.
I know, and it had no effect. You know, his approval rating was rock solid through that whole process. It did not move any voters or move public opinion in any meaningful way. And so that's a point about whether you know, whether the people are a little bit inured to the surprising nature of American politics in a way that they weren't in 2016, where that last week shocker of the email scandal being revived did apparently move some votes.
Okay, final question before we bring on Amy. And Amy, I hope you're tuned up and ready to go here soon. Carroll, you know, there's been a lot of criticism of polling, right?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one of the questions that people submitted in advance was, since the polling was wrong last time, what are pollsters doing differently this time around? Well, I always say the national polling was pretty spot on. It was the state swing state polling that fell short. So anyway, but what's your answer?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think, you know, the professional group of pollsters did a major post-mortem on this, and that's basically what they found, that the national polls were by and large pretty close to. I mean, the difficulty is, you know, for pollsters in this era, is that these elections are so close. Certainly the Clinton-Trump election was so close. And that you get these splits between the popular and the electoral college, the popular vote and the electoral college. Clinton, of course, won the popular vote, lost the electoral college because of fewer than 100,000 votes in 3 states, including Wisconsin. And so, you know, these are small margins we're talking about. So the possibility for error is high. And also, again, I think that the late developments, I think, first of all, there's more polling I see on a state level this year, perhaps anecdotally, but I think if you were to look at the totals, there's more polling this year, which is a good thing. And there's probably going to be more late polling to cover these late breaking events so that those won't get missed.
Yes. So any closing thoughts before we bring on Amy Levin from
No,
Group?
just happy to be here, and I'll send you a link when we go live with our next survey. And people, there's a lot of data for people to look through on all kinds of groups in the electorate.
Okay, thank you very much, Carroll. You can sign off now, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and now we're going to move to part 2 of this day 1 of the 2nd Annual Midwest Polling Summit, organized by WisPolitics.com and sponsored by AARP Wisconsin and the Outrider Foundation. I'm welcoming in now Amy Levin. She's with the Benenson Strategy Group, and she is a pollster for AARP. Welcome, Amy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course, and you're coming to us from LA.
I am, yes.
Good for you. Anyway, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the mission is for you in terms of polling in Wisconsin and other battleground states?
Sure. So with AARP, we set out on a battleground project to understand both the mood of the electorate in general, but really dig in on the 50-plus voter. You know, I think there's a lot of attention gets paid to younger voters because they tend to be a little more unpredictable. But one of the things we really, you know, in addition to 50 plus and 65 plus being the sort of the most reliable voting bloc, you know, they are turning out, the largest voting bloc, 50 plus. What we really saw in our work is how much, particularly seniors, the 65 plus group, is the key swing of this election. You know, so in September, we did a poll in 6 battleground states. We did 18 plus. I won't dwell too much on old data, but, you know, Biden was up 5 overall. But the big headline was he was up 17 points with 65-year-olds. He won that group in Wisconsin by 1 point. And now he is losing them. He was losing them by 17 points. It's down now. He's still losing them by 11 points. But the sort of just sort of stunning swing with seniors that you've seen in a lot of polling since, I think, was the big headline there. But we also looked into issues around voting. AARP is very focused on making sure that people can vote safely in however they choose to vote, wherever they choose to vote, that they have safe options. And as everyone knows, it's just become such a politicized issue. We saw that in Wisconsin, 52% of Biden voters were planning to vote by mail versus just 14% of Trump voters. In some states like Arizona, where vote by mail is almost universal, I think we might see fewer people voting by mail, at least among Trump voters, because of the way he has framed that issue and politicized that issue. And the last thing before I just get to our current poll, one of the things that was interesting with Wisconsin, one of the things that made it different from the other battleground states is it had been impacted by COVID less at the beginning of September. And so you saw much starker partisan divides at the time. 87% of older Biden voters always wear a mask. 39% of older Trump voters said they always wear a mask in September. Now we have our latest poll. It comes out today. It's just 50 plus voters, but we do see coronavirus concerns are increasing by double digits and double digits across the board. Trump voters, Biden voters, 50 to 64-year-olds, 65 plus. I think we're still in the process of seeing how Trump's hospitalization and sort of laissez-faire approach to containment is going to impact this, but in other states, I think we'd seen even more dramatic movement because of the impact coronavirus had. And now that Wisconsin is getting to that point as well, I think you could see even more movement in the coming weeks. The other thing, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to also flag one of the other interesting changes we saw this time is a 7-point drop in the percentage saying they were extremely motivated to vote for Trump. Across all of the states, Trump voters were a little more enthusiastic than Biden voters, both groups very enthusiastic, but Trump a little more so. And Biden enthusiasm among these older voters is up a point and Trump's is down 7, and Biden's now ahead of Trump on enthusiasm, which just given the sort of overall narrative, I think is also pretty stunning.
Okay, and we can share some of these details in a written form to the audience. And so I didn't want to inundate everybody with graphics, but just lay out a little bit about the polling. So your polling project were in 6 battleground states. Which 6?
Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And
how many polls in each? Are you doing 2 or 3 in each of those states?
So we're doing 2 only in a couple of them. Most of this was a one-time thing.
And you did 2 in Wisconsin.
Yes.
Because Wisconsin is the most important state in the union, right?
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
I'm sorry, you're in California. You can say California too, but anyway, Wisconsinites are proud.
Not this time of year. California is not important.
Okay, right. Okay, again, this switcheroo on older voters, whether they're 50 plus voters or 65 plus voters, this switch from 2016 from from Trump, him losing them, you're still saying he's losing them by double digits this time when he won that group handily.
Yep.
Well, does the polling tell us why?
Yes. So one of the things we ask in this, we have a series of who do you trust more on a variety of issues, Trump or Biden? Coronavirus is the main headline, the second and third headline as to why this switch has happened. Seniors 65 plus are much more worried about it. Their lives have been impacted significantly more. We also saw with our polling for AARP from the beginning, as soon as the stimulus talk started, seniors became very nervous about how Social Security would be impacted. They know what happens to the Social Security fund in times of trouble. When people start talking tax cuts, many seniors know what that means for the stability of the program. So it's certainly the health impacts of coronavirus and how it has been managed by the White House that I think is really impacting these numbers with 65 plus. But we also see they tend to trust Biden more on some very personal economic issues. One of the things we see in a lot of our polling is everyone trusts Trump more on the economy when you just ask it like that. But if you say, who do you trust to look out for working and middle-class people? They trust Biden more. Who do you trust to make healthcare more affordable? They trust Biden more. Who do you trust to protect Medicare and Social Security? And it's Biden. And I think that's part of why you hear Biden and Harris trying to personalize this so much, because it's at this point, it's like Trump's brand is the economy, but most voters are not buying what he's selling about the shape the economy is in.
Yeah, when were you out of the field in this latest poll?
October 8th.
Oh,
I'm sorry, October 6th.
okay.
Today is October 8th.
Yeah, today's October 8th. Anyway, October 6th. So, I mean, so much is happening every day. It's sort of like it's hard to, I think that there was polling in Wisconsin yesterday from the Marquette poll, and I think that Charles Franklin, who's with us tomorrow, said voters are just so dug in. Have you seen much movement from last time you did the poll in pre-Labor Day to now?
Nothing outside, nothing very substantial. No, it got,
And how do you explain that?
Voters are pretty dug in. I think there's slow movement over time. If you look at these seniors, you can't look at seniors and how they've moved since 16 and say people are completely and permanently dug in. But I don't think the time of 5-point or more shifts in a month is a reality anymore, just with how polarized this nation has become. We started this election with probably 92% of the voters decided. Now,
So what is what's the latest undecided in your ballot test?
4%.
Now, can you just go through the ballot test? Did you? I assume you asked the ballot test, right?
Sure. We only have it for 50 plus in this latest one.
Okay, and so what was the ballot test at 50?
So with 50 plus in this latest, we're at +3, 49 Biden, 46 Trump. With 50 to 64-year-olds, we're at 45 Biden, 49 Trump. And with 65 plus voters, we're at 54 Biden, 43 Trump.
Did you include a third party?
We let them say other. We did not list them out.
Okay, so undecided plus other equals what? You're not sure?
3%.
Okay.
With 50 plus.
So I don't know whether you have any data to compare it to. I mean, what Carroll was talking about is there just seems to be fewer undecideds, and the third party impact is going to be lower.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that assessment?
5% undecided. Sorry.
5.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that assessment? That one of the differences between 16 and now through your battleground states and in Wisconsin is that what he said in terms of fewer undecideds and fewer third-party choices, and maybe that's contributing to people being dug in.
Yeah, look, I think Democrats, at least some of them, and certainly the older ones have learned their lesson. Wayward Democrats have learned their lesson about protest votes. I think there has been digging in on both sides. And there's just been far less attention paid to third-party candidates this time versus last time. And I can't say, except for the little Schultz interlude, but, so I think that has to be part of it as well. Both sides were doing a lot more, whether it was Hillary surrogates talking about the importance of not voting third party, or Donald Trump sort of encouraging it for lefties. I think there's just more conversation. There's less conversation around it now.
Yes, I just want to remind the audience if they want to ask a question specifically to Amy, I'll ask it, but you can type it into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A, and you can type in a question and I could try to work it in. Amy, you talked before about the economy. When you asked that of your +50 in Wisconsin, does Donald Trump still win on the economy issue?
Yep, so he wins rebuild the economy by 8 points. 51 trust Trump, 43 trust Biden.
But then when you go and ask these other questions, there seems to be, I don't know, what would you call that, more open-mindedness to Biden?
I think more open-mindedness and a sort of more a recognition of a more of an emotional connection that he has with people. They trust him slightly more on looking out for middle and working class people. I think there's the knowledge a very ingrained knowledge that Trump is going to do right by the stock market. But there's also, particularly among seniors who have felt so abandoned, not necessarily the belief that Trump is going to look out for them in the economy is very different than whether he's going to look out for the economy.
What other issues did you poll this 50 plus group in Wisconsin on? What other issues, top issues can you talk about here now?
So one of the obviously we talked about coronavirus. With 50 plus, we talked a lot about protecting older Americans, particularly those in nursing homes from coronavirus. And it's not just that seniors are in nursing homes, it's a lot of these 50-somethings, 60-somethings have a parent in a nursing home. And I think that is an issue that it doesn't get talked about quite as much, but it is very heavy on people's mind. The fact that they haven't been able to see or hug their parents in a very long time. And it gets to, again, the sort of the stock market argument versus the people-centered argument. But that has been a big issue for people, as well as affordable health care.
And you talked about, did you ask specifically about Social Security?
We did. Strengthen Social Security and protect Medicare. 49 trust Biden, 41 trust Trump.
What's the biggest winner for Biden? If the economy is the biggest winner for Trump, what's the biggest winner for Biden on the issue front?
The biggest sort of where he has the biggest margin, he has an 18-point margin on working effectively with both parties. He has a 16-point margin on helping heal the divisions caused by racism and racial tension. But I think those things are already baked in. It's really, those advantages of his are already baked in. It's really these jump balls, and it's, from my perspective, it's whether they can get people to focus on the personal side of the economy and not the stock market and other sort of macro metrics.
So what is, you said jump ball, that's good because the NBA finals are going on. What's the biggest jump ball? Are you saying the economy is a jump ball?
I think that how they define the economy and how they get voters to think about it is the big jump ball. Trump gets away with a lot of sort of message dissonance. But when he's out there talking about how great the economy is, I've done some other work with the very hard to reach undecideds and soft voters. They are not feeling this great economy. And I think at the end of the day, that's going to be the deciding ground for most of this very small group.
There's a question came in from the audience about how strong is the rural-urban divide? Does that show up in these battleground states, especially Wisconsin?
Absolutely. The divides on everything are so stark, whether it's, I would say, gender, education, and rural-urban, once you get outside of partisanship are the strongest. I think COVID in some ways accelerated that, at least in the beginning, because it was such a bigger problem in the cities than elsewhere. But
not the case anymore.
Not the case anymore. Yeah.
I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I just, so do you think that that's driving change in this rural-urban divide question, or?
I think it's one of many things that keep pushing these two worlds further apart.
You mean the attitude towards, say, a mask mandate? Mm-hmm. Did you ask about mask mandate?
We did not, no.
Okay. So in other words, how they're taking cues, both sides taking cues from their political leaders or whomever, their rhetoricians, and they're forming their opinions based on that.
Yep. And that, I mentioned this up front, but just to reiterate, is one of the starker things I thought from our original round of polling in September, how in Wisconsin, the divide between Biden and Trump voters on mask wearing was the biggest of the 6 battleground states that we looked at. We did not ask it again. I don't know that it's gotten better, but the pattern has been the less a state has seen coronavirus, the bigger the divide is between Trump and Biden voters on the issue.
Now, talk about engagement. Carol brought this up too. Voters are engaged. I mean, there's a lot of things coming at them to keep them engaged. Devices from campaigns and commercials and everything. People always say, "Well, I tune that out," except maybe they don't. It heightens their engagement. But you've also found this high engagement. Traditionally, this 50 plus group has been a high voting group anyway, right?
Mhm.
Are we seeing them even more apt to vote this year? So make them more powerful, I guess, as a constituency.
I definitely think so, and I think we also see, because so much more is going to be done by mail. In states that have gone to all vote by mail, at least in the first couple cycles, it tends to benefit the Republican side, because older voters, even though they're so reliable already, when it's mailed to them, are even more reliable. They're watching the mail, they're returning the mail, they're reading the mail. So that's one of the perplexing things about what the Republicans have done on the vote by mail issues. It actually could have benefited them. But I do think the increase in sort of stakes and energy and everything at play here is having an effect across the electorate. And you see it in early returns, you see it in the lines on early voting day. But I think the aspect of, I think we're going to have even higher turnout among seniors and older voters in general than normal.
So, but most of these 50 plus voters who are voting are going to do it by mail absentee. Is that what you found?
Not most, and it depends who they're voting for. So we found 52% of Biden voters. Sorry, give me 1 second, actually. Now 58, it's gone up to 58% of Biden voters plan to vote by mail, only 50 plus. Only 19% of Trump voters 50 plus plan to vote by mail. Of the battleground states, voting by mail is, of those 6 that I mentioned, voting by mail is lower in Wisconsin overall. But still we have, 38% overall of 50 plus voters saying they're going to vote by mail.
Right, but this was this was hyped by our April election, a pandemic election, and then that was really pushed on people. And so it is a switch around from our normal behavior in an election year too. But again, there's the polarization factor coming into just how are you going to vote?
Yep.
Right. Let me go to try to get some other audience questions here. Do you have anything on pre-existing conditions, the pre-existing condition question, or the ACA as it may come up in the Supreme Court hearing?
Not in this particular poll. I've obviously seen quite a lot of polling on it. I think it's obvious from Harris's answers last night and other things that just how powerful, when talking about the Supreme Court, a lot of pundits go right to Roe v. Wade. The big concern really is, and the big thing that Democrats are going to be focusing on is ACA and taking away protections for people with pre-existing conditions. This is pre-existing conditions hurt Republicans a lot in 2018, and I think some of them have learned the lessons and are trying to inoculate on it. But I think they're going to struggle to have credibility on this when they are literally in court trying to throw out protections for pre-existing conditions. The other thing that we see heighten this issue, and again, you heard a reference to it last night, is that coronavirus is slated to be classified as a pre-existing condition. And the numbers were already huge for the number of Americans with pre-existing conditions, and it's going to get bigger.
All right, here's another audience question. I'm just going to read it because I think a lot of, anyway, this cause may call upon you to speculate, but what the heck. We just saw a debate last night, and our mailboxes in Wisconsin are inundated with political mail. What is the information source that most voters are using to make their decisions? And is Facebook a big differentiator for older voters? Any sense of that?
I don't think any one source is a big differentiator. I think they all sort of eat at the margins. And what I see as the biggest determinant is where they get their news from. When you look at not just do you watch MSNBC, CNN, or Fox, when you look at how many hours of Fox do you watch in a week, that's where you start to see like a real, this is what predicts the vote. So look, I of course, paid communications matters. I think it matters on the margins. I think people's sources of news is an even more important thing at this point in time.
Okay, here's another audience question. Have you looked at climate change and how that has been polling?
It's not, in a lot of places, I would say it's, especially in swing states, it's certainly not a defining issue for the electorate as a whole. It is a very critical priority to the Democratic base. And so to turnout, to making sure people are excited and engaged, that is where I think the climate change issue plays. But there's, of the 3 or 4 crises facing America right now, I think for a lot of voters, that's number 4.
Right, it's a long-term thing. So I wonder though whether it does percolate with some 50+ voters who think, oh, what about my kids or whatever?
I think it's on their list of worries, especially for that older generation who have grandkids. I couldn't say it's at the top of their list, but we definitely see, with seniors in particular, we have seen increased concerns about coronavirus. About climate change.
So that's showing up. That's
Coronavirus.
okay. That's showing up in some of this battleground polling you've done?
Not in this particular polling, we didn't ask about it.
Okay. Okay. So now let me go to, I mean, you've been at this a long time. And so, I mean, again, there's a lot of high interest amongst, I think, people who follow polling about how the polling is done, maybe more so than ever before. And I think it is a good idea to help people filter out the bad polling, okay? Yeah. You know, we try to, with politics, try to concentrate on polls that are done well and rated highly. So, but why don't you talk about some of these, you know, again, there was a question that applies to that Carroll answered that applies, you know, to all pollsters, and I'll be asking it in some way. You know, since polling was wrong last time, I mean, a lot of voters or people following this, they think that the polling was wrong, but it wasn't wrong. It really wasn't wrong on a national level, but on some of these state levels, it's a little tricky.
Yep.
So what about that?
So I think there's a couple things that I know we have really adjusted in how we do polling and how we look at it. I mean, one of the biggest flaws in the polling that did go wrong, and you're right, the national polls and plenty of the state polling was on and some of it was off. So I think there's a few things. One, the biggest correction I think that has been made is on education. It is easier to reach college educated voters. They are in one place for longer, so their contact information is more stable. So in 2016 in particular, a lot of the polls really overestimated what the split would be between college and non-college. And that is as dramatic a split as gender, as rural urban, in terms of how it goes. So if you get that proportion wrong, you have the poll wrong. So I think that's been one of the biggest corrections. Now, you usually, as a consumer of public polls, you can't always see that, or you can't usually see that. So I would say, as you're consuming public polls, look at how it was conducted. Did they talk to voters from the voter file, people they know who are going to vote? How did they conduct the polling? This is a very hot debate. We do a combination. We call landlines, we call cell phones, we text cell phones, and we email. And of the view that if you just use one approach to contacting people, you're contacting way too limited a group. But some people are, just doing sort of like online panels with Facebook ads. You are not getting a representative sample with Facebook ads. So looking at how did they contact people is a big part of it. I would also, one thing about the polls is look at who's doing it. a partisan pollster is only going to release a poll when it has good news for their candidate. That doesn't mean we don't have polls with bad news for our candidates. It just means we didn't release it to the press. So that creates an implicit bias in what you are consuming. The other bias is, and this was a big problem in 2016, is herding. Is someone has a very different poll and they're nervous to release it because it's so different from what everyone else is saying. Well, then you have your own bias. So I do look for the sort of the outlier polls, and I'm not saying give them any more weight than you need to, but we can't just dismiss polls. You know, when we did this poll in September and we saw seniors so far from where they had been, we spent a lot of time vetting that because we were very nervous to say such a dramatic change has happened. We had the Arizona Senate race closer than a lot of people. And I think it really is about consumers, producers of polls, news agencies all have a responsibility here to be sort of more responsible about this.
Is there such a thing as a silent Trump voter or a you know, when you poll them, or a silent Biden voter?
It's hard to say if something that doesn't make themselves known is there. I will say, you know, I've seen a lot of different experiments on this, and I've seen a lot of mixed data. We just don't see it because people are so surrounded by people like them. I think the sort of ashamed to talk about who you vote for is a little bit of a myth. There are ways of getting around it, asking who your spouse is voting for, who do you think your neighbor is voting for, your friend. There's never been really that consistent findings.
Okay. I hope you can share with us, you know, some written details of this, of your most recent polling in Wisconsin, 50 plus, and comparisons to the other Wisconsin poll. That would be great. And I think it, you know, our audiences would love to see that. I really appreciate it. Amy Levin from the Benenson Strategy Group, and she's the AARP pollster, battleground pollster this year. Amy, really appreciate you coming on board, and thanks very much for taking your time.
And there is a sort of couple page memo about most of the numbers I went through that is out this morning, as far as I know. So we'll make sure you get it.
Yeah, okay, please do. And we'll pass along, audience. And you can just hang on, Amy, while I wrap this up. Audience, we have day 2 tomorrow. You can find out details at wizpolitics.com. But Charles Franklin will be on board, Ray Block, Emily Swanson, Sarah Simmons, and Barry Burden. We'll have an hour-long panel discussion. And if you have questions, you can submit them in advance, or you can use the chat function. So I want to thank everybody who was part of this today. Both Amy Levin and Carroll Doherty from Pew Research. This has been day 1 of the WisPolitics.com's second annual Midwest Polling Summit, and our sponsors have been AARP Wisconsin and the Outrider Foundation. So please tune in tomorrow at the same time, noon Central Time, for an hour-long discussion with our panel on day 2. So thank you to Amy and Carroll. Thank you to you, the audience, and we'll see you tomorrow.